Today marks the release of a joint report authored by the Metropolitan Planning Council and the Illinois Justice Project. I'm going to steal a joke from King. If you like the report, ILJP wrote it. If you don't like the report, it's MPC. Along with the release of the report, we're excited to hear from leaders from both inside and outside of government on the issue of housing and reentry today. The paper in this event could not have been made possible without the incredible support of the Chicago Community Trust and the Field Foundation. I thank them. I also want to thank seriously our great friends at the Metropolitan Planning Council for their partnership on this incredibly important report. Speaking of the report, is entitled Reentry Housing Issues in Illinois, and as it highlights early on, we as a state spend a great deal of resources incarcerating people, but spend far less ensuring that those individuals do not return to prison or return to the behavior that we as a society disfavor. We as an operation of law have stripped thousands of individuals of opportunities and resources and freedom through incarceration. We have a moral imperative to their communities, their families, and the individuals themselves to find a better balance. With that said, it is my job to introduce a leader that has committed her organization, the Chicago Community Trust, to supporting real solutions to that current reality. When I think of all the incredible work the Chicago Community Trust participates in, all across the spectrum, all the issues, all the people, there is simply no more important work than I can think of among all the things they do than supporting the Illinois Justice Project. A close second is their focus on closing the racial wealth gap. Closing that gap will take progress on the very issues we're talking about today: economic justice, criminal justice, and issues of reentry. Those issues will enjoy future solutions identified, inspired, shaped, and supported by the Trust. I'm now happy to introduce to you the President and CEO, Dr. Helen Gale.
Thank you. I guess I should say the check is in the mail, but yeah. So just a few brief remarks. First of all, it's really our pleasure, and I see my colleagues Joanna Trotter and Anna Lee is here somewhere, maybe some others who have really led the way on so much of this work. So on behalf of the Chicago Community Trust, just want to say thanks to all of you who are here, and for all of you who are here because you're part of this work and understand the importance of this work. As Sharon mentioned, we have placed as our highest overall organizational priority closing the racial wealth gap. And as part of that effort, clearly these issues and the intersectionality of housing, incarceration, and economic justice are very much at the core of our areas of focus. And when we think about this issue, particularly of housing, and what it means to have stable housing, particularly when you've been involved in the justice system, and what it means to come out and have all of the uncertainties that we all know face people who are returning citizens. When I was kind of reflecting on the importance of housing, I started thinking about the number of times that I have to fill out a form where my address and my zip code and all of the information about housing is so much a part of it, and then thinking about what does that mean to not have that sense of stability, to not know that you have a place to come home to have an address to give to your employer, to be able to do all the other things that are so rooted in having a home as something that all of us take so for granted, and what it means in terms of your own sense of self, your own sense of dignity, your sense of stability, and your ability to be a functioning part of society. And so for people who are coming back into society already with this sense of instability, this issue of housing and how it interacts, and the importance of this for people returning to society, I think cannot be underestimated. And so, we were just so thrilled to have the opportunity to support this work, reentry housing issues in Illinois, and also so pleased to be able to work with our partners, Illinois Justice Project and Metropolitan Planning Council, that does such great work in this arena, but particularly pleased to have King Harris, who is a senior fellow at the Metropolitan Planning Council, be so much a part of this, because as all of you know, King is such an advocate for these issues, but I'm also proud that King spent, I think, 10 years on the board of the Chicago Community Trust, so we consider him part of the family. I know all of you consider him parts of so many different families that we are a part of. So I'm going to turn it over to King to talk about this more, but just to say how much we appreciate housing being so paramount to individual stability, especially to people who are justice involved, and to thank all of you who are here today. And all of us go to these kinds of openings where we hear about reports and we're pleased because there are issues that we're involved in. But I hope that as you hear this report, that you think about how do you take this report, its findings, and bring those not only to the work that you do, but to the communities that you're involved in, because we think that these are the kinds of issues that people don't always think about, and that we can all be ambassadors for this information. We can all be ambassadors for this work. So I hope we all go out of here feeling renewed and supported in these efforts, and that we all carry a little bit more of this information with us in the many walks of life and the many ways that we work together. So thank you. It is our honor to have been able to be a part of this incredible work. So turn it over to King.
Before beginning my remarks, just looking around the room, I want to thank many, many people in this room who really helped us put this report together. It was a 2-year project. We got great cooperation. I like to think that some of the smartest minds in the country that could deal with this issue are both here in northern Illinois and in the state, and also contributed to it. So, this reentry housing report. Yes, we're formally releasing it today, and I can say proudly, I think it is as comprehensive as any report of its kind published in the United States. It does reflect 2 years' worth of work and research undertaken by the Illinois Justice Project, thank you, Paula, and the Metropolitan Planning Council. So what do you take away from this report? First, we clearly have a major problem, which Illinois must deal with. We have 28,000 people who serve out their sentences and are released every year by the Department of Corrections. Though they do get some help in finding housing, resources to do this are limited, and therefore very few of these people truly find adequate housing once they leave the DOC. Here's another interesting fact. 40% of those individuals are going to return probably within 3 years at a substantial cost to all of us. More important, think of the impact it's having on their lives. And third, and this is the encouraging thing, we have the means at hand to do something about this. We can sharply cut back recidivism. Our new director of the Department of Corrections, Rob Jeffries, is here today, and he pointed out to me that in Ohio, where he's come from, the recidivism rate is 32%. Ours is 40%. If we just cut our recidivism rate to 32%, we would substantially already reduce our expenses in the Department of Corrections, and I'm sure Director Jeffries will tell you that under his leadership, we're going to even do better than what happened in Ohio. So what can we do? We can certainly do a better job preparing current inmates for reentry by expanding the job training and job experience programs while they are here while they're in the Illinois Department of Corrections, we have programs that are working. We have programs that are working. We have over 900 people in our adult transition centers. We have another 360 in our life skills centers. We can substantially increase the number of people in both these programs, prepare people more effectively for the world once they get out. We can also give serious thought to diverting more people from the Illinois Department of Corrections in the first place. I'm looking at Paula Wolf down here, and she was the first person who tried to educate me and others about the value of diverting people, not even sending them to the Department of Corrections to begin with. If you think about it, if the Department of Corrections is given someone to imprison for 3 months, 6 months, even a year, what can they really do in terms of training? Very little. So why send them to prison to begin with? Maybe there are better ways to do it. Redeploy Illinois. Already a successful program can be expanded. I think there's more we can do in terms of just parole monitoring people right in the community. We can, of course, also expand housing opportunities for those who leave the Department of Corrections. In this report, we cite 14 specific ideas. Let me talk about a few of them. We can certainly create more permanent supportive housing earmarked for those leaving the Department of Corrections. IDA is now launching a trial program, which Audra Hammernick is going to talk about later, which will provide a trial for 80 individuals. But let me tell you something. If it works, that program could be substantially expanded. We can work with landlords to remove restrictions for renting to low-risk individuals leaving the Department of Corrections. A lot of people don't know, but IDOC today does a very good job evaluating the risk profiles of people who leave the Department of Corrections. Most people who leave are low risk and not dangerous, and these are people who can effectively rent apartments and not cause problems. We also like the idea of providing incentives to landlords to rent to people who have left the Department of Corrections. We can also get public housing authorities to amend their administrative plans to eliminate restrictions for those who have a criminal background. We can also create opportunities for people who have left the Department of Corrections to actually build housing, learn skills, build housing, which in many cases they can live in. We have some visitors, and I want to single them out, who come all the way from Virginia today. Raise your hands. And they were telling us before about some of the programs they have in the Norfolk area that effectively do this. We can do this. The city of Chicago is already doing it on an experimental basis. We can expand those programs. And we can also expand successful housing transition programs, like those being run by organizations like SAFER, St. Leonard's, and a Safe Haven. Of course, there's cost involved in doing this, but let's consider the alternative. The Illinois Sentencing Advisory Council estimates that each recidivism event costs over $150,000 when all the costs, not just the prison costs, but also taxpayer and victimization costs and other indirect costs, $150,000. Well, divide that by 2. It's still $75,000. And compare that, by the way, to the ongoing cost of an IDA-like program that Audra will talk about, which is probably no more than $15,000 to $17,000 a year. And by the way, the total cost of all this, not doing anything, well, think of it this way. If we, each year, 11,000 people go back, who get out this year, 11,000 will go back to prison. If we prevented that from happening, we could save $1 billion a year. So before continuing the program, I just want to again thank the Metropolitan Planning Council, the Justice Project, IDA and IDOC for all the help they gave us in doing this. And now it is really my pleasure to introduce Juliana Stratton, our Lieutenant Governor. Lieutenant Governor Stratton has had a distinguished public career, previously representing the 5th District in the Illinois House of Representatives. But what makes her presence here today very special is that she has been passionate about reforming our criminal justice system for many years. She was the director of the Center for Public Safety and Justice at the University of Illinois in Chicago. You should also know that the Lieutenant Governor was a professional mediator and operated her own small business for 20 years. So given this background, is it a big surprise that Governor Pritzker assigned her the responsibility for overseeing his wide-ranging justice initiative? And therefore, it's my pleasure to introduce our Lieutenant Governor.
Good afternoon. So good to be here this afternoon. I would like to begin my remarks with just a few acknowledgments and a cough and expressions of gratitude. Thank you to Dr. Helene Gale of the Chicago Community Trust, to the Illinois Housing Development Authority Board Chairman King Harris and Secretary Audra Hamernick, to Illinois Department of Corrections Director Rob Jeffries, to the Illinois Department of Human Services Secretary Grace Ho. Much gratitude as well to Mary Sue Barrett and the Metropolitan Planning Council for hosting us today, and to Paula Wolf of the Illinois Justice Project for all of your behind-the-scenes work to improve the lives of people all across our state. I am proud to serve as your Lieutenant Governor, and I appreciate this opportunity to just share a few remarks and have just give some thoughts about this incredibly exciting opportunity. As many of you know, I am a lawyer and have been in public service for most of my life. However, it was my work in community as a restorative justice advocate and trained peace circle keeper that has really been the foundation for how I approach policymaking. While I know that many of you in this room are, of course, familiar with restorative justice, for those who may not be, while we have come to hear this phrase more often, it is not a new phenomenon or trend. Restorative justice actually has its roots in indigenous peoples who understood that when a problem arose in their village or tribe, that they did not have to go outside of that village or tribe to resolve that problem. Instead, they would gather the elders to come sit in a circle to share and listen and identify solutions. They understood that a person who has been harmed by an offense and the one causing that harm were not the only ones harmed, that the entire village or tribe must be engaged in the solution. In fact, in the restorative justice world, we say that the wisdom is in the room, that all of the solutions that we need are found right here in rooms just like this, but not only rooms just like this, but rooms found in our communities working alongside of the people who are most affected by these issues. As I approach my work in policymaking, first as a state representative and now as Lieutenant Governor, I aim to do no harm with the policies that are being created. But I also intentionally seek ways to repair the harm that has been done by policies throughout the decades, working alongside the people who have the wisdom that's found in our communities. What do I mean by harm? Well, here in Illinois, the communities that have the highest rates of residents touching the justice system are also the communities which have the highest rates of unemployment, the fewest educational investments, the least access to affordable housing, the most limited social programs, and the highest rates of gun violence. So Governor Pritzker and I are approaching these issues around justice reform through a public health lens, and one that recognizes that it is not our healthy communities that are struggling with high rates of interaction with the justice system, it is the unhealthy ones. And here's what we know. First, that while all of us may be in various positions of professional expertise, communities must be engaged, including those who are justice involved, for they are often the best ones to tell us their needs to be successful outside of the system. We have to take a step back and actively listen and practice empathy. And second, we simply must connect the dots on these issues. We can no longer look at criminal justice reform as a singular set of issues to be addressed in silos. We have to look at the concept of justice to be more comprehensive and include education and healthcare and employment and, of course, housing, and how often ill-conceived policies have led communities to being unhealthy. Healthy communities do not have high rates of residents who are justice involved. Now, through my professional background, I came to understand what the cost and toll can be on communities that are disproportionately impacted. Few job opportunities, almost no mental health resources, limited access to quality schools, and the list goes on. All combined with far too easy access to guns. Hence, the revolving door we often see in our justice system. Housing, for example, has a narrative that is all too familiar to low-income communities and communities of color in Illinois. And we could talk about many things. We could talk about the racially restrictive covenant and how when Blacks migrated from the South, they were confined to the Black Belt, which we now call Bronzeville. And let me be clear, this by no means suggests that there are not amazing people and tremendous assets in these communities. I have lived in Bronzeville myself for over the past 2 decades, and there are considerable strengths in these communities. Yet, unfortunately, any community that was once strong and vibrant that is starved of resources and investment becomes a shell of its former self, and it requires true leadership and prioritization and political will to help make these same communities healthy again. We could talk about redlining and how federal housing loan programs and banks refused to make loans in urban neighborhoods, and they were redlined, meaning that they were considered not worthy of investment. Or we could talk about the GI Bill and how Black veterans were largely denied the benefits of home ownership. In other words, we could talk about many policies and programs because even before people ever entered our jails and prisons, there were extreme barriers to housing. Today, housing barriers come in a new form, especially for the 25,000 people leaving our Illinois prisons each year. For some, they are navigating federal laws that restrict them from public housing. For others, they are dealing with municipal ordinances that prevent them from accessing private housing. Some are simply dealing with the lack of housing, all while trying to get employment, improve their mental and physical health, recover from substance abuse, and reconnect with their families and friends. So how do we make it easier for people to have a place to call home? We need a restorative approach and solutions that put equity at the center. A few weeks into the beginning of our administration, Governor Pritzker signed an executive order that created the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative, also known as the JEO. And the JEO is being spearheaded by my office under the leadership of Quinn Rollins, and marks the beginning of Illinois creating a justice system that better reflects our values with a keener focus throughout state government about how the lack of opportunity and inequities are tied to people becoming involved in our justice system. The JEO is needed because our justice system is not working like it should be. And this initiative will move us from strictly a punitive approach to one that examines the root causes of the issues we face while creating solutions that put community right at the very center. Building off the work of our partners, we have learned that we cannot have real justice without equity and opportunity, much like we cannot have real opportunity without justice and equity. The JEO will conduct research, pilot programs, and advocate for legislation to ensure all agencies in our state are talking to each other and working alongside one another and local entities to move our state forward. because we know it is often at the local level where we see so many innovative programs and ideas that we at the state level can learn from in terms of what's working in local jurisdictions. I'm thankful to have Governor Pritzker as a partner, and I'm proud that he has entrusted the JEO initiative to be housed in my office. And our message through our actions is clear that we are focused on restoring the harm of failed policies, including failed housing policies, so we can rebuild healthy communities and create opportunities for communities across Illinois. So in that spirit, we know that to repair the harm, we must recognize that we spend billions each year, billions of dollars each year, to incarcerate people, and far too few dollars to help them return. And as I've stated, one of the mandates of the executive order in establishing the JEO is to convene any state agency and to support pilot programs that will test groundbreaking efforts to reform the criminal justice system. And that is why I am proud to announce today that the JEO, in conjunction with our Illinois Housing Development Authority and other partners, will be launching a groundbreaking pilot, the Reentry Demonstration Program, a new initiative to meet the housing, employment, and service needs of individuals exiting our state prison system. Thank you. The Reentry Demonstration Program will serve two extremely low-income populations, those who are elderly and/or disabled, who are being released from incarceration, and those enrolled in a graduated reintegration program and have a post-release plan that includes employment. The Illinois Housing Development Authority will provide funding for rental assistance to participating agencies who will in turn identify local property owners to provide housing for individuals exiting the prison system. The rental assistance, which is funded by a portion of the real estate recorded document fee, will cover the difference in the reasonable rent for the unit and the tenant's contribution. And I know that the Housing Development Authority hopes to work with the Illinois Departments of Corrections to refer individuals who have developed a pre-release plan to participate in this program. Lastly, evaluation. We are also working with our partners to develop an evaluation of the impact of this program. This is a step in the right direction. The Illinois Housing Development Authority estimates that the current unmet need for permanent supportive housing units in our state is nearly 20,000 people. That means that we must work to ensure that this pilot becomes a model for what we can do as a state. The governor and I made it clear from day one that we cannot do this alone. It will require more than just the executive branch, more than the legislative branch, more than the judicial branch to solve the issues impacting our justice system. It will require all of us working together, never giving up hope, and believing that every community, every person has the right to be healthy and have access to housing. Because when someone is housing insecure, it makes everything else that we hope for them that much more difficult. So if we really want to make our communities to be safer, and if we really want men and women to successfully reintegrate into their communities and contribute to the health of their families and their communities, then we simply must work collaboratively to ensure that they have access to the same opportunities that we would need to be successful under those circumstances. And certainly at the top of that list, if not at the very top, is housing. I look forward to working together with all of you in these endeavors, and I look forward to collaborating with you to help move our justice system and our entire state forward. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I'm Alden Lowry. I'm the senior editor of the Race, Class, and Communities desk at WBEZ. I will be your moderator for this afternoon. Thanks again for joining us. As our panelists are getting themselves set, I will give you intros in just a moment. I just want to take a moment to just talk a little bit about myself, jokingly, but was here at MPC for 2 years as Director of Research and Evaluation, and during that time, I knew that King was working on this report very closely with Nancy Furfer and Angela Rudolph, and this was something that I was deeply intrigued by. And every now and then I would tap Nancy on the shoulder and say, so where's the report? When's it coming out? So on and so forth. Unfortunately, I'd left, but when I heard the report was done and this event was going on and I was asked to moderate, I was very happy to do so. So just to echo the words of the Lieutenant Governor, we may take for granted very small things, but for men and women coming home from prison, as I'm sure many of you understand, those small things become incredibly large things. Covering criminal justice for the Chicago Reporter some years ago, a story I was editing that a reporter was working on, Sarah Carpenter, the reporter, she was following a gentleman that she connected with for his first few months out of prison. We were hoping to find someone literally the day they walked out of prison, and we wanted to chart what that experience was like for them. So she connected with a gentleman named Keith Gatewood about 6 days out of prison. He was at the office, I believe at the Safer Foundation, looking for some help finding work, and that was his primary goal, was to find work. And he said he was going to give himself 100 days to find work. If he didn't find a job in 100 days, he was going to go back to doing what he knew how to do. And that pressure, I think, was indicative of the challenges that men and women face coming out of prison, the short timeline that they have. The thing that I think we learned in that process was how much human dignity is a part of that journey. And when people don't have it, they will take shortcuts to get to it. So finding a home, finding a job, finding self-respect. That was one thing that Keith talked about a lot. This sense of self-worth that he gained from being able to assemble and disassemble weapons very quickly, the value that placed to the gangs that he worked with, that was of value to him because that made him worthy. That was the way in which he found self-worth. He was trying to find other ways to find self-worth. And each day that went by when he did not have a home that he could call his own, when he did not have a job where he could earn an income, it ate away at him to the point where he felt like, I can't do this anymore. I have to do something to give myself that sense of self-worth. So the thing we take for granted in terms of a home, in terms of a job, for men and women coming out of prison is a mountain. And so this report today, I think, perhaps offers some ideas and some thoughts, and we're going to engage with our panelists to talk about them to kind of provide that feeling of human dignity and self-worth to men and women as quickly as possible when they get out of prison. So let me introduce our panelists here. Starting from my left, we have Robert Jeffries, who is the director of the Illinois Department of Corrections. To his left, we have Grace Ho, the director of the Illinois Department of Human Services. Good to see you again, Grace. To her left, we have Ms. Sierra Blackwell, a staff organizer with the Inner City Muslim Action Network, also known as Iman. To his left, we also have Audra Hammernick, the executive director of the Illinois Housing Development Authority. And finally, we have Quinn Rollins, who is the director of the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative inside the Office of the Lieutenant Governor, which Lieutenant Governor Stratton spoke about just a second ago. There's a lot to dig into here, and there's some specific questions that we'll have for some of you. Broadly speaking, in this report and many of the initiatives that were offered in terms of, I'll just throw a couple out there, public housing and authorities kind of losing the administrative rules regarding people coming out of prison or people with records, landlords who are reticent to rent to individuals with criminal records. What obstacles do you see to implementing some of the recommendations that the report includes? And Are there thoughts on ways you can overcome them? This is a general question that any of you can jump in on.
This is Audrey here in the Metropolitan Housing Development Authority. That's a really good question, a really important question. Our local housing authorities all have we're trying better. Our local housing authorities, they do have administrative plans and they do have the flexibility to amend them. So it's up to us to educate them and give them the resources they need to amend those plans and get their boards on board. And that's something that we can do. IDA, too, has been thinking a lot about, even if we put these resources in place, can we find landlords that will rent to people? And we can say that we can. We have applications that have just came in, the rental assistance program that the Lieutenant Governor spoke about. We're thrilled to announce that we have 4 applications in, 4 counties are now on board. And they're telling us that they have landlords that are willing to rent. So that is a huge barrier, and we're pleased to announce that it's not exactly as bad as what we thought it would possibly be. And I can tell you this, Housing Choice Partners, they have applied for Suburban Cook. The Winnebago Housing Authority, they have applied for Winnebago, Boone, and Stevenson County. The pilot program, as King mentioned, we're planning on between 80 and 100 persons leaving the Department of Corrections receiving rental assistance. So this is a big deal because this represents half of these applications we already have in hand, and we understand that more are coming in. We're hoping that this is very successful. King mentioned that the cost for doing this is minimal, and we'll be able to do a lot more because we understand with that 28,000 people coming out of prison, this is 100.
Just to stay on that point, can you tell us a little bit more about, in terms of this pilot, how long is it meant to last, and what's the capacity in terms of the number of people served, if that's something you know at this point?
Yeah. We're estimating between 80 and 100 people served in the demonstration. We're hoping that we have a variety of locations and landlord types. We're hoping to get the kinks out of it during this first demonstration. We think that the applications that we have in-house right now, the good news is they're in high need areas for people leaving the Department of Corrections, so that seems to be matching up nicely. And it works where if, let's just say that the rent is $500 and the person leaving DOC, if they have any income, they'd only pay 30%, so let's just pretend that they can pay $100 a month. That remaining gap is what IDA would be filling with the rental assistance.
And if they have no income?
We are working on that right now, that we would pay the full amount. The interesting thing is, and Director Jeffries could certainly speak more than this, but we've had a reentry task force that the Department of Corrections and IDA have been hosting together, and many of you in the room are a part of that. I want to thank you because you've all learned a lot. We've learned a lot, and one of the difficulties that we've learned, and it's really important to landlords, is we don't know the exact day someone is leaving. So if they're exiting on a certain day, there could be several weeks window there. So our program's been designed where people could sign leases while they're still incarcerated, and then have a 45-day window, which makes our landlords feel pretty comfortable. It would also makes the person leaving prison pretty comfortable too, because they know they have somewhere to go to day one.
Great. And in terms of the length of time, is there dedication?
3 years.
3 years.
The demonstration's 3 years.
Thank you. Anyone else want to talk about some of the barriers you see to implementing some of the recommendations in the report, and any thoughts you might have on how to address those barriers?
Good afternoon, everyone. Gosh, there's so much that is coming to the forefront of my head, but I'm going to try to stay focused, Alden, on your question. And I also want to piggyback on what Lieutenant Governor Stratton had talked about, which is the wisdom is in the room, what I think has been lacking. And so as we're having this conversation, I'm feeling like this deep sense of frustration, because I feel like many of us in the room have been having different parts of the tree conversation, but kind of losing sense of what the forest is. And so with my Woods Fund kind of roots, just having come back to state government in the middle of March, I think the biggest obstacle when we think about any of these issues is the will. I think, speaking frankly, which is increasingly the only way that I can speak, is that we as a public are actually okay with the status quo, which is why we've let it continue on as it has. And so, I see these moments in these reports and the good work of MPC and the Illinois Justice Project as ways to continue to catalyze and keep these conversations moving forward. And all these recommendations are critically spot on. I think one of the things that I would say is, and I try to do like a visual search and find Illinois Department of Human Services, and I'm pretty sure we are not included in this report, which I think part of me is like, phew. And the other part of me is like, we have a critical role in the vibrancy of the system. And so I think we are at the table because, we want to be a part of the solution. And being a part of that forest. And so, I think the frame that I think is like the eternal kind of struggle on these big system-wide issues is that, and I think about this with people with disabilities, people who are homeless, immigrants and refugees now, is that any time we provide any additional government service, it's like we're doing them a favor, right? And so if there's a way to kind of reframe the conversation, I think especially as it relates to returning citizens, is we have created circumstances that actually created the situation that you're in. And so we actually want to fix that. And so it's not a favor to you that we are now actually trying to provide you the road and the services to have a trajectory to be like a healthy, vibrant member of the community, which we should have done kind of many years ago. So how do we reframe the conversation? And also think about it in a decompartmentalized way, which is, the issues that people are returning citizens face are also the people who are not yet returning citizens who live in those same communities, but yet the more you need, the less money you have, the more hoops you have to jump through and doors you have to knock on just to get the basic things to survive. And so, I guess it doesn't exactly answer the question about landlords, but how do we all kind of pull in this same way to say that there are just minimum things that people are expected to have and that we as members of the society minimally have to contribute to give?
Sure, there are a couple of folks. Quinn, we'll go to you first, and then Director Jeffries will come to you.
So, thank you for having me. A few years ago, I read a stark report. Some folks in here may have authored it. It came from the Illinois Juvenile Justice Commission, but they looked at reentry and what it looked like across housing, healthcare, all the different conditions that folks were being asked to comply with upon release. What they looked at is they looked at referrals and they looked at linkage. Now, I forget the number exactly, but it was like 3.8% or so of folks who had actually been referred to services. 3.8% of the conditions that ultimately people were supposed to comply with, they actually been a referral or linkage to that. So we're not just talking about housing, we're talking about healthcare, talking about educational services, we're talking about a range of different types of things. So that's not just a problem for the residents who are relieving our facilities. That's a problem with the system generally. That's a problem with how the referrals are happening. It's a problem with the processing out. And when we talk about this program, this doesn't work unless there's significant collaboration across a range of different agencies. It doesn't work unless the Department of Corrections is on board to identify individuals in terms of that pre-release planning process. It doesn't work unless the Department of Human Services is on board in terms of the wraparound services that are required. So for me, that's the reason why the JEO is so important, because my experience has been that our agencies have worked in silos. It's very territorial. We're wading through that. We're going through some growing pains right now. And for us, we're constantly trying to build a team and an atmosphere that lives out the lieutenant governor's values, because she's a restorative justice practitioner. She wants to mediate things. It's a very different culture than has existed before. But if we're talking about executing this type of program and pilot and ultimately getting to scale, it means a much different framework than has existed before. But those numbers in terms of that 3.8%, that's because of the culture that exists right now.
Quick follow-up, we'll get to you in just a second, Director Jeffries. You've got at the table here a number of people who can be players, right? You mentioned DHS, we've got IDA, we've got DOC. There's some practical things that can be done to kind of build that kind of collective mindset and team that you speak of. I mean, are there some things that you can do right now? I mean, you guys could huddle afterwards. I'm being facetious here, but are there some practical things that can be done to kind of build what you're envisioning there?
Right. So I know that both the Department of Director of Corrections, Grace and Rob, they've come on a few months ago. Actually, we came on around the same time. But IDA had been working on this program for a while. So when I was doing my rounds, we started talking about this program and what would it mean for it to get off the ground. Right? So we've been building these relationships. We've been having conversations. Me and Director Jeffries were out actually at Stateville Prison yesterday. We talked about this briefly towards the end, but we need to make sure we have the longer conversation to get it going. So it's not just about the announcement. It's ultimately about the relationship that I built for a long time implementation.
Great. Director Jeffries?
Well, I kind of wish I would have went first. Thank you for that. So it's an opportunity for me to share some of the changes that we've done in the Department of Corrections. Just this last Friday, we changed a little org chart to bring some emphasis on the reentry and programming pieces for our returning citizens. And so in the audience with me, I have my program director who's going to also lead the division on reentry. I don't think that's ever been done in the Department of Corrections. And so I have three of the most instrumental people who's going to lead that charge sitting with me, and that's Nikki Robinson, Jason Garnett, and Allison Williams, which is it's going to have to be a continuum of care, starting at reception with these guys. Now, in full disclosure, I've shared this with a number of people in the room, different venues, that we need to have better risk and needs assessment of our offenders in the country. That risk and needs assessment also needs to include case planning to address their needs. That also needs to filter into their parole supervision into the community. Until we get that baseline together, then we'll just be throwing bad products. So that's our number one issue, our initiative that we're doing with the Department of Corrections. I've had a number of conversations with Quinn, as he mentioned, but we got some work to do on our end, but identifying that reentry is the center of our focus in programming, and getting the right person, getting that right program to address the sympathetic needs is very crucial for us to be successful. One of the things that recidivism will not show you, because we don't have to do a good job of collecting data, so we can do better at that. Where we see the numbers of incarceration have reduced, so certainly the number of recidivism numbers will reduce. One thing that we've identified is our technical violators is constant. If we don't have a good risk and needs assessment, then we don't know who is coming back and for what reasons. And so I know we're going to get into some other conversations about the type of programming that's going to be available for people returning citizenship. But I also see, when I'm reading through this, a lot of this is geared towards that low risk. Folks, so we've got people leaving out in the north. All right. So there's going to be some expectations from some of my partners out here when we start having these contract services out there about addressing those needs. And I'll stop there. I've got a whole lot more to talk about next time I go before.
Nasir, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add.
No, I just wanted to add. That's great hearing this moving forward. It's also great meeting Robert Jeffries, Director of the Illinois Department of Corrections. I think one of the biggest problems that we're going to foresee is we do have departments and agencies involved in this, but what about your 501c3, such as Iman? We're out there with different foundations, right? Target Area Development, Communities United. You have organizations across the city of Chicago addressing the needs within their communities from individuals returning home from prison, right? Because, if I'm correct, close to 55% return to the 5 zip code areas of Chicago. So we're saying that annually 25%, 25,000 leave Department of Correction. What does that number look like if 60% is returning to Chicago alone, right, as far as housing? And then returning to those same 5 zip code areas, you got 501c3 community organizations trying to implement programming for these individuals, right? Because we're rebuilding our communities, 1 block at a time, right? So what does that look like? It's going to be involved with commitment. We have to have that stream of commitment from all the departments, from everyone involved. Because without that, I don't foresee this coming. I mean, me personally, coming home from this experience, I still cannot find a place to rent because the application process, because I'm on family, right? So I'm barred just off on a piece of paper, black and white piece of paper. Thank goodness Cook County Commission ended that. That starts November 1st of this year, but it doesn't help me out, right? And from my experience in regards to ban the box, just because your employer doesn't have to ask if you have a felony background doesn't mean that employer is not going to do a background check on you. So we still have a lot of hurdles to overcome in regards to a culture. We're talking about an institution that's been in place long before we even got here, right? And even though we're breaking down these barriers through policy changes, the culture still exists. And so the fact that we're in this room today is a good headway, but we still have a lot of work to do in regards to commitment.
I just want to stay on that point around the culture. Do you have thoughts on how to chip away at that? Have you seen examples where people, maybe perhaps after meeting you, after knowing you, had a kind of a greater understanding of people with records still being people? Or has that been a challenge? Just wondering if you had any thoughts about trying to eat away at that culture, fighting that culture.
Education is key. Conversation is the only way to break that barrier down. We have to continue to have conversations. If you don't know who I am, you have to conversate with me, right? And then you can judge my character from that. Don't judge my character from something you read in the paper, okay? Or something that I might have committed in the past, or you may have committed in the past, right? You will not get to know me until you talk to me. And then we can work on the relationship. That's how it starts. One conversation at a time. And then we work out all the nuances in regards to resources, policies, right, and structure. But it begins with that first conversation.
Director Jeffries, we're going to come right back to you, actually. The report makes explicit mention of adult transition centers and the life skills centers, and kind of makes a recommendation to expand those, either increasing the bed capacity or creating more of those centers. I remember visiting Crossroads some years back. Jerry Butler took me on a tour. There were a number of programs going on there, explained how it all works. And some of the men who were there that I talked to talked about how invaluable those months that they had there at the ATC before they were released to find work, to kind of reacclimate themselves to society, having the freedom to move about. And there were more centers when I did that reporting back in 2000, 2001 than there are today. I know budget constraints have been a big issue. There was a one time Crossroads was on the verge of being closed. Where do we stand on our ATCs and our life skills centers with regard to their financial stability? And does the department have plans, albeit considered our struggles financially in Illinois, does the department have plans to increase the capacity or the number of those centers as the report recommends.
We can always hope. My desire is to expand, but let me remind everybody, I'm 61 days in the job.
But you said you wanted to go. You want to go first.
61 days. 61 days on the job. But so you bring up a value point about getting folks ready to go home, and so the hope is to increase those based on budgetary allotment. That is the hope. There's a lot of legislators who are out there who are in support of that. I had conversations with Stratton yesterday about that very same topic. And so, yes, there is an expectation to increase. Here's the value, and here's how we can augment that in the meantime, in the short term. And that's with concentrating on our current reentry processes at our facilities. And that's increasing the value and the employability of the individual for them to be gainfully employed once they go out. That's to increase their tangible items that they can have when they walk out the door that include driver's license, state ID, applications for jobs, Medicaid, referrals, linkages that we just spoke about as far as mental health services. We have to do a better job with all our facilities and not just concentrate on just select few to do the work that everybody should be doing. And that's the only way we're going to tackle this whole reentry effort is to hit everybody with some expectations and have some checklists at every facility that this offender who's going out today has A, B, C, D. He has a job set up. He has employability. He has a resume. He has interview skills. He has a vocational trade. He has a licensure. We can just go on and on. Those are the efforts that we're trying to do throughout the agency, not just concentrating on select few facilities. But yes, your answer to your question, the short answer, yes, our plan is to increase that.
Audra, I'm going to come to you quickly here. So we're starting with 80 to 100 beds, a 3-year commitment. And I don't know if the Lieutenant Governor spoke to this or if you mentioned this in your opening comments, but so what's next? And to the director's mention of, not everyone coming out of prison is elderly or disabled. And having had served many years, there are a number of people who are coming out who, look different. I'll say that. In terms of expanding this effort, are there conversations in that direction? Are there thoughts at this point about working with folks who wouldn't be considered the low risk? So if you can answer that.
Sure. A couple, I'm going to go big picture and I'm going to answer your question. The one thing that I know that the different departments in the state are really committed to, and we've been having some conversations with Grace about this, is we don't want people to leave one system and hop into another. The last thing I want is someone to leave a DOC system and hop into the homeless system. Or, we need to be really conscious of that and help people where they're at. So we're avoiding that. I think at IDA, we're recognizing that housing is just fundamental to stability. And I know that there's many other things that goes along with that, employment and well-being and mental health. But these vulnerable populations, we feel really committed to permanent supportive housing. And I'm bringing this up because you said the word beds. I just want to make sure that it's absolutely clear that we're talking about individual apartments. And what we want to make sure that there's no confusion that we're not talking about congregate care, we're not talking about halfway houses, we're not talking about group homes, we're talking about someone having a key with a 12-month lease. They come and go as they are allowed. They have their own kitchen, they have their own bathroom, they're not sharing and going down the hallway and sharing with a stranger. I don't want to do that, right? So this is very dignified housing. And the support service piece of this kind of looks like this. It's what you need. It's no more and it's no less. So if you have certain needs for, you have some behavioral health issues, you get that services. If you need help, you don't drive, you have a physical disability, there's someone that can help you get where you need to go. So I want to be clear about that. And what's next? Honestly, I'm hoping we get some wicked problems to deal with in this particular demonstration, because it's going to be messy. And if we can get some messy issues right now, it'll help us solve them. So when we're moving forward with maybe even harder to house populations, we'll be better prepared. So I think there will be a next. We're seeing that for every 100 people, it takes about $1 million a year to house them. So it's just simply math. This can be completely scalable.
I want to toss a question to you with regard to the effort around housing, reentry housing. I think Nasir's point about that culture is a big one in this particular arena. Landlords decide who they want to rent to and who they don't want to rent to. The program, the incentives are certainly helpful. I just wanted to ask you, that is an enormous hurdle to climb, and just wondering if you have thoughts on ways in which you can bring landlords around to being open to the notion of, I reported on, it was a woman who talked about, she was a safer employer. She talked about being at a conference and mentioning that she hired people who had records, and she said she could hear an audible gasp in the room. That's how shocking or even horrifying that was, a thought to people. I imagine if she were in a room with landlords would have had a similar reaction. How do you combat that in an effort to provide housing for folks leaving prison?
Sure. So a couple things. We have such low vacancy rates right now. It's hard for any poor person to find housing, right? I mean, it's just really difficult in the marketplace that we're in. It's even way more difficult for folks that are living with records. One thing that we're doing with IDA in our tenant selection plans, we're making sure that how people select people for their buildings are fair. We have about 250,000 units in our portfolio, so that's a drop in the bucket compared to the entire state. But when they are seeking our type lending products and our equity sources, we're making sure that folks are being treated fairly within the admission process. And I think a lot of it is telling success stories. I have plenty of folks that I'm meeting that are employers with the exact same story that you just told, that they are hiring people that have records and they are perfectly happy. We've heard stories downstate through this task force that DOC and IDA chaired together, where people are really excited about the employees that are coming from DOC, especially in deep southern Illinois. So I think we've got to talk about a lot of these successes that are happening. And then for each of our agencies, I think that we're thinking about our internal culture. At IDA, we have a 2-year strategic plan. This is certainly a part of that planning process, and we realize this demonstration project is just a piece of it. But internally, our staff is like fired up. They're really excited, and I'm having many employees coming to me and say, although they may not be program staff, just other people that are working with the authorities saying, how can I be involved in this? You know, I have a nephew that's coming out. Like, I really want to be helpful. So I think it's getting our collective thinking caps together, especially folks that aren't necessarily doing this type of work every day, thinking about how can we do it differently. And I think the communication around success is important piece of that puzzle.
Quinn, this is a question that I was supposed to ask of the Lieutenant Governor. You're the closest person here to the Lieutenant Governor, and she's the closest person to the governor. So by virtue of that equation, you're the closest person in the room to the governor. Just wanted to ask you a question around resources. And so Director Jeffries even hinted at, yes, our plans are to do this, but in some respects, a lot of this boils down to what is the state willing to commit in terms of resources to these programs and to this overall end. Is there anything you can speak to, conversations that you've been privy to with the Lieutenant Governor or perhaps with the Governor about what kind of resources might be devoted to this effort and others dealing with issues facing men and women leaving prison?
Well, I'll tell you what I've learned in terms of effective process. And staying close to OMB, Office of Management and Budget, meeting with them about the types of things that are coming down the pipe so they can be prepared to help make the case to the General Assembly, in the case of the governor, etc. So depending on our folks who crunch those numbers. So we've had conversations about the adult transition centers. Right? What are their thoughts on those? One of the challenges is all of them haven't been thoroughly evaluated. So, for example, before Director Jeffries came on, myself and Lieutenant Governor went out to Peoria's adult transition center. So some of them were concerns around increase in funding, the expansion, but when we asked them had it been evaluated, they were like, no. So it becomes very difficult to make the case we want to be in that respect, right? So we know they've cut from, I guess, 12 over the last decade to about 4 or 5 now. So that's one issue. Another issue, I think, is us thinking about the way, the extent of where they run effectively. So most adult transition centers, to my knowledge, don't accept people who are in there for violent crimes. Right? So we need to think about that if we're talking about this broader shift in terms of what it means to assess people based upon risk as opposed to charge. The last thing I'll say is that I'd be remiss if, when we talk about mental health, we don't talk about the fact that when people enter and ultimately are leaving our prisons and jails, they don't get assessed for Medicaid. They don't get enrolled in Medicaid. They aren't connected to healthcare providers. So we know that 99% of the folks we're talking about, their access to healthcare is with Medicaid. Right? So we did it through Cook County Jail when the ACA was expanded because it was beneficial, a lot more folks, some money, etc. But we need to do that. If we're talking about equity and opportunity, this needs to be something that we're doing broadly. And in previous administrations, when I was working with some of my colleagues in here, particularly Sharon Mitchell and Paula Wolf, we've had conversations with former agencies. And one agency thought one agency was doing it, the other agency thought the other one was doing it. But this is the reason why the JL is so important. So we can come to some common understanding about what's not happening and start to troubleshoot those different types of things, because other states are enrolling people in Medicaid before release.
Thanks for that. We are going to now turn to does the audience have questions? You sure? All right, we got a few questions. Okay, so Adam is our mic handler. Oh, he's right here. Which mic do you need? This one here. All righty. All right. Well-oiled machine. So Adam, I saw a question here and a question here. A question in front as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Joanna Trotter with the Chicago Community Trust. And as Dr. Gale mentioned earlier in her opening remarks, we're really proud to have supported what we've called our Housing Plus portfolio, which is really looking at housing as a fundamental intervention if you think of the range of outcomes we're trying to seek, including for those who are justice involved. And I guess I'm just looking for your advice, given that we are now 3 years into this funding and have had a number of projects, including the one that resulted in today's report, that we think are really starting to move the needle, whether it's flexible housing pool that Corporation for Supportive Housing is working on with the City of Chicago, and a range of others. What would be helpful to you to sort of see where the traction and models are, at least in the Chicago region where we're focused?
This may be Housing Plus, which I know the trust can do. So I think one of the things that I was thinking about in this conversation, and I was actually in the West Side earlier this morning talking about a lot of issues that are confronting particular neighborhoods in the city, specifically around violence prevention and safety. And we had actually, when I was at the state previously, we had been working very closely with philanthropy in piloting these offices that we called Open Door, which is kind of the positive way of saying no wrong door. And what we quickly realized, so what we were trying to do is we were trying to put all of the Department of Human Services services and supports in one place, to my earlier point, so that people didn't have to go to multiple different entry points, and working very closely with community providers to have kind of like a one-stop shop, which was Open Door. And I think what philanthropy enabled us to do as government was not actually kind of the lift of huge kind of millions of dollars, but rather flexible funding to experiment and to figure out what the fluidity of resources needs to look like. And what we ended up finding out, because one of the open doors was on the west side, was that the returning citizens issue was probably the predominant issue. So we fund mental health, substance abuse, youth services, employment and training, SNAP, we're the front door for SNAP, Medicaid, TANF, et cetera. But I think when you're re-entering a community, you actually have to pick, okay, what am I going to do today? Is it housing, or is it food, or is it medication? And that may be actually the decision for the month, right? And so how can we actually look at the system as a whole and use philanthropic dollars? So I think philanthropic dollars allow more malleable way to kind of squeeze, I think, government players together when oftentimes, like, additional approach is not the issue. It's actually decompartmentalizing and really serving people in a more integrated way is I think, half of the problem.
We have a question in the second row here.
Hey, how you all doing? My name is Colette Payne, and I work for Cabrini Green Legal Aid. I am part of the Restoring Rights and Opportunity Coalition of Illinois' Team Rocky. Right, so I have a few questions. And my first question is, will these 100 units be available to families, women with children? Are they going to be SRO, single room occupancy style? That's one of my questions.
Sure, I can answer that. There are a variety of sizes of units. We've budgeted for even 3-bedroom units because we're hoping that we can lean on families. So it's a variety of sizes of units.
Okay. And so I'm thinking this is a great start and it's wonderful. And thinking about those of us who have already been out for numerous of years, thousands of us, like, what does that look like, housing opportunities for us? This past legislative session, we were working on the bill HB 3322, tax incentives for landlords. We didn't move that. Do you all have any suggestions on how we can move it next legislative session?
You know, hi, I know who you are. You were in our office and we've talked. Yes, I think that there are existing tax incentives on the books for owners that have low-income housing tax credit funding and also USDA funding. We could expand that to include other types of affordable housing, and certainly it would align nicely with folks, landlords that are renting to people coming out of DFC. So I think there's options out there. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. We can do it.
Okay, we have another question. I've got you and you and you on the end there, and you, and we'll try to get as many of you in as we can, okay?
Hi, I'm Lori Jo Reynolds, and I'm here with two wonderful guys from the Chicago 400, Anthony and Noe. We wanted to ask about, and by the way, this is really inspiring and amazing, so thank you so much. We wanted to ask about one group of people that wasn't mentioned in the report, and I know anyone who works in housing or works with people who are homeless has had to say no to this group of people. And of course, people in the Department of Corrections has to say no to this group of people. And those are people with past convictions for sex offenses. The only group of people who is banished from housing by state law. The only group of people who may own a home, live with their mother, live with their kids, and be told by police you can't live in a home. So in a sense, we don't need homes for these folks. They have homes, they had homes, and it's state law that banishes them. They're also the only group of people, mainly the only group of people, trapped in the Department of Corrections for years when they should be serving supervision outside, past their release time. They're also the only group of people, when they are homeless, who has to register weekly with police, which we know a lot of these guys, there's 400 of them, they have 1, 2, or 3 jobs, and they have to go stay at the police station every day, and they miss work, and they miss job opportunities. And the only group of people not allowed in shelters. So I wondered if you have, and luckily this group of people is amazing, and they're supporting each other, and they're organizing to try to change the state laws. But I wondered if anyone in this room, of course, could help with that and support them, but I wondered if the folks on the panel or the folks who wrote the report have thoughts about this. And just one more thing, who is this group of people? Well, 80% of them almost are African-American men from the west side of Chicago and the south side of Chicago who don't have family wealth. And more than 60% of them have spent time with administrative violations, due to failure to register and being in the wrong house, et cetera. So it's, the return to prisons is great. That's a recidivism rate that wouldn't have to happen at all because these violations often have to do with housing. And so Noe, who's sitting next to me, for example, his conviction was in the 90s. He spent 18 months in prison, and he's since spent 6 years in prison for administrative violations. He wanted to live with his mother and help her. She died while she was in prison, so he got a conviction out of that, lost the chance to help his mother. Just does nobody any good. So sorry for the long question, but does anyone have thoughts about this group of people that I know a lot of people in this room is working to help in general?
I would refer people to the report that the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority put out about 2.5 years ago under a mandate from the Illinois General Assembly, which documents very clearly that these are people who are unlikely to commit another crime, particularly unlikely to commit another sex offense. And if you're talking about changing culture and educating people, this is the population that people have to really learn about and understand. So go to the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority website and look at that report. It's really remarkable that it was put together. It's also despairing that nobody's paid any attention to it. So that's the next thing we need to do.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm with the Illinois Department of Corrections. So we're talking about the specific population that is in our custody, and one of the things that has been very difficult for us in order to get them placed is the laws that are now in effect that restricts where they can live. And as you have alluded to, they are least likely to recidivate. They have the most employable skill set, and that we have found that when they do get on supervision, they do not recidivate. There is a very big fear that with them coming into our communities, that we fear them. No, we should know that they're there. That is why the registry is there. Because when they operate in secrecy is when they're likely to offend. But when they have eyes on them and they're out working and they have adequate supervision, which we do by parole, they are very successful and they move on and they are least likely to come back into our system. So we need to start working with our legislators to ease some of those housing restrictions on where they can return back to their community.
I had a question here in the front, yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot. Tony Lowry, Safer Foundation. A lot of variety of experiences with inside the institutions. Also like to thank IDA for funding our focus apartments. It was on the front end of the CHA reentry pilot where we were able to get 35 Section 8 vouchers for our clients. The thing that I always like to let people know is that we have to get past the data points of the research. We have to see the humanity in the people we're servicing. I sit here as a person with a criminal record, 3 generations of incarceration in my family, nephew and Menard today. This is real, this is big, this is devastating to communities. Housing is a basic right. And I think in echoing what Lori Jo said, I was a member of the state sex offender task force, and the testimony was riveting. It was heart-wrenching. So I think as a state, as far as getting past the data point and realizing that every point is a human life, then we can come up with real strategies to make sure we're trying to service those humans. We rebuild communities as far as I man, one block at a time, we rebuild it one person at a time. Because again, we have to show success. When a person comes in DOC, they must understand they need to start documenting rehabilitation. Because as a Section 8 landlord for years, and at the Cook County Ordinance, working with Pat Fromm, who just left, educating landlords on what rehabilitation looks like, what the rap sheet looks like. The rap sheet reports arrests and convictions. You can have a person with 27 arrests, no convictions, but that person will be discriminated against. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Collaboration is powerful. And again, I think if we can just see the humanity in the people we're servicing, I think that will give us that extra energy to move forward and really give some justice and opportunities for the people we serve.
Okay, I'm just looking at the boss here. We've got time for one more question. Okay, Adam, I'm so sorry for everyone who raised their hands. The woman on the end there in the front row had her hand up a while ago.
Hi, everybody. My name is Willette Benford, and I'm a returning citizen. And when you spoke about those who have a violent offense, I'm one of them. However, when they look at the record, they don't see that I got an immediate release from Department of Corrections because of a new law. All they'll see is the violent offense. You know, they won't see anything else. And so I'm currently at Grace House, which is a transitional house. So what does this new program look like for someone like me? I've only been home for 6 months. I'm currently employed. You know, I have an active cosmetology license, you know, and when you talk about the successes, you know, or someone that can be a face for this, you know, I am somebody that is doing what was necessary to do coming out of Department of Corrections after serving over 2 decades.
Sounds like you'd be the perfect face. When you talk about success stories, we would love to tell your story. I'm going to say a but though, and you're not going to like it. Okay. Right now, the program's set up that we're reaching into the Department of Corrections to get folks as they're coming out so they can go directly into permanent supportive housing. So for folks that are already out, it wouldn't work. And that's not saying that if this is very successful, and we certainly hope it is, that we could extend you know, the program out to folks that have already been released.
So I have another question.
Yes,
so what does DOC or this program or organization do for the people that have already come home that will be homeless if they cannot get housing?
Yeah.
And still on parole, still reporting every week, and have to, you know, try to find housing in that time frame too. Find housing, get food.
I know.
You know,
It's
all
tough.
of that.
I totally get it. It's tough. Right now, the program, the pilot that we've got, we're in the middle of, it doesn't address it. I don't know if you have anything else that's happening right now. I can tell you that when we had the task force, we learned a lot about folks that, you know, this issue was brought up. As a matter of fact, our friends talked to us about this too when they were talking about the incentives for landlords. So maybe that's something that we could also hit on that front. Maybe it's double. I know there's many solutions to this problem that will all work together, and we've certainly hit the nail on the head.
So my name is Jason Garnett. I'm the chief of parole. So after this, me and you're going to have a conversation because I'm going to do everything I can to help. Okay.
I think that's about as good a point to end on as we can get. So please join me in thanking Director Robert Jeffries, Secretary Grace Ho, Organizer Naseel Blackwell, Director Audra Hammernick, and Director Quinn Rollins. Thank you for being here. I will now turn the microphone over to Mary Sue Kendra Freeman, who sometimes dresses up as Mary Sue Barrett. How you doing, Kendra? Great. I'm doing well. All right, thank you all. You've been lovely. Kendra.
We miss you so much. We miss Alden's sense of humor here so much. So thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's been a really wonderful conversation. I know some of the things that stuck out to me was just the need to continue to work collaboratively around not just government, but also community organizations to really ensure that we're integrating services for people as they're reentering communities. And again, I think what Nasir also brought up was very important about how do we begin to attack not just the practical side of this through policy, but how do we begin to do things that begin to change the narrative of how we think about people who are justice involved and how we're welcoming them back home and providing not just the support, but also the mindset that we're not continuing to punish them over time when they've already, done serve their time. So I think those are good things to think about as we continue. And here at MPC, just in our housing work, we're really excited about the work that Paula and King and Nancy have started and how we'll continue to think about that and hopefully continue to work with all of you as we move forward in next steps. So thank you all for coming. So I just want to formally again thank the panel, Directors Hammernick and Ho and Jeffries and Nasir and Quinn for your participation. Thank you so much, Alden, for finding time to come back and moderate this conversation. Thanks again to Paula, King, and Nancy for your leadership on this issue, and also to many of you who worked, and contributed to the focus group work. So that was very critical to shaping this report. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, so Chicago Community Trust for financially supporting this work. Thanks to the Field Foundation for supporting this event and our ongoing Equity in Action series. So there's some flyers out front if you want to know more about the Equity in Action series. We have a few other events coming up that we hope you'll join us for. So on August 15th, Filling the Gap, looking at affordable housing crisis through design, will be here at MPC, so we're hoping you're going to come back and join us for that. And then on September 19th, we have our annual luncheon, which will feature Raj Chetty and John Rowe, and it'll be really interesting information talking about how we think about communities of opportunity and economic mobility. So again, thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and hope to see you soon in another MPC conversation.